Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, everyone. Devoid of wonder, we remain deaf to the sublime. But in order to experience this wonder, we do not need to invent anything. The first thing that will make this wonder real is to look at what is there, what is around us, and what is inside all of us. To have a look at ourselves. Sometimes, and this is the theme we are going to deal with tonight, that in a situation like the one that we traditionally call nihilism, that terrible situation that is a situation that Friedrich Nietzsche in the 19th century defined as a situation where we do not have a meaning of life. It can happen that looking at what is around us, and today we have a lack of meaning all around us. We have no certainties. So when we look at this situation, this sense of wonder comes back to us in front of the experience of the heart and the mind of man. So this is why we chose the title, The Challenge of Living in the Era of Nihilism. So this is in a way a provocative title, something that is calling us. So we will be talking with two distinguished guests, and I'm really honored to welcome Professor Eugenio Borgna from Milan.
Professor
Borgna is a psychiatrist, the most famous psychiatrist in Italy. He worked for a very long time in the psychiatric clinic in Novara, and he believes that patients are more than just a disease. A patient is an abyss of lack of meaning that we need to listen to. We need to feel for our patients. Our second guest is Professor Umberto Galimberti, who's here with us. And he's, he was originally a philosopher, but actually he is also a psychoanalyst, and he's also known as an interpreter of our time. He writes on some weeklies, and he actually reflects upon certain themes, and he tries to understand this phenomenon of nihilism in its relationship with the technical and scientific dimension of our society in younger generations. So, well, I would like to start from this consideration. In a moment of great economic, political, social crisis, in a moment of crisis due to the pandemic, there are many different attempts at analyzing the situation, but these attempts can't always really achieve their purpose. So we need to have an overview of the situation before starting with an analysis. So I will ask Professor Borgna to start from his working experience, from his personal point of view. What is your opinion of the condition of the contemporary man? What do you think is the most difficult problem so that we can understand what is happening?
Ringrazio intanto delle cose bellissime che hai detto.
Thank you for your very kind words that opened up incredible sceneries, and I will try to follow this path. But I would like to thank the President of Communion and Liberation who invited me here after some time. The first time I was invited by Father Giuseppe, who is still like a morning star, to look at when the dark night of the soul captures us. Psychiatry today is not just the discipline that deals with the madness. And the psychiatry has a lot to do with the poetry, and psychiatry gives us the right to open up debates like the ones you introduced. And its goal of analysis and research is the interior life of man. There is no human project or a human conscience that is not close to this kind of search for what we have inside of us. Whereas nowadays we are more focused on the external behavior of people, of what is happening around us, without making a connection between what is happening today and what happened in the past and what is going to happen in the future. So this is actually the biggest void in our human condition. That is to say, a lack of interior analysis, the search for what we are in our thoughts, in our hopes, and also in our desperation. Now we'd like to ask Professor Galimberti. We were talking just before this session, and he said that when we talk about nihilism, we often do not understand what we're talking about. And we need to actually face this problem. Please let us let us understand this aspect, this phenomenon. While there is an emergency, so to speak, nihilism is a psychological and social condition characterized by the fact that the future is unforeseeable. And the word future is extremely important for us because we grew up in a Christian culture. Well, there are so many different kinds of Christians. I myself prefer the Greek way of thinking, but I am a Christian as well. So I would say this is a collective view. And Christianity looks at the future as a promise. we have three different times. The past is bad, is evil, is the original sin. The present is what we are doing now, and the future is redemption. Science has this Christian way of thinking because for the science, the past is ignorance, the present is research, the future is progress. I think that Marx himself was a great Christian. The past is social injustice, the present is the explosion of the contradictions of capitalism, and the future is justice on the earth. Freud, who wrote a book against religion, says that the past is negative, where the trauma is created, the present is the therapy, and the future is the healing. So everything in the West is Christian. And everything is based on the concept of time, where in the end, what happens is exactly what had been promised. The Greek culture, which is at the roots of the West, thought that the Golden Age was behind us, and that the passing of time would lead to a sort of decay. Christians actually turned this dimension upside down. The past is evil, the present is remedy, the future is healing, so to speak. Nietzsche, who actually talked about this problem of nihilism, says that God is dead. This is announced by not an atheist, but by a mad person, because we killed God, he says. We are the great murderers, and we are now falling through a void, and the churches are the tombs of God. What does this mean with reference to nihilism? Well, it means the two terrible proposition is that we do not have a purpose. The future is not a promise. It is unforeseeable. It is even a threat. And second, if the future is unforeseeable, that means that we have no answer to the question, why should I study? Why should I do things? And why should I live? There are so many young people committing suicide. So nihilism is very, very serious because it has taken away the positivity from the future, which was at the basis of the Christian culture. And we need to understand this connection. We need to understand if God makes the world or if it does not. Otherwise, the future is no longer a time where you can find a remedy to the current situation. So this is the situation we are living in. So nihilism, as Heidegger used to say, needs to be kept alive in a way. We need to look nihilism in the eyes. But people do not want to do this because our Christian conscience doesn't want to admit that there is no meaning. When I started to work as a psychoanalyst in the 70s, thanks to Professor Borna, who really taught me a lot on how you have to interact with patients, people had problems that had emotional or sexual sources, but now people are looking for a meaning, and the meaning is a product of the Christian culture because it has been, it was the Christian culture that gave time a meaning, making it part of a big project, and when time is part of a project, it becomes history. Now this history has collapsed. Time is just a series of days. Young people live in the present because the future is no longer a promise, and I believe that when they get drunk or when they use drugs, it's not just because this gives them pleasure, but it is because they wanted to avoid looking at the future and feel this anguish that comes with the meaning of time. I would like to go back to what Professor Borgna was saying with this latest consideration by Umberto Galimberti. Professor Borgna said the problem is to look inside ourselves And Professor Galimberti says we no longer find our inwardness. And in what he writes in his books, we find the impression that this lack of inwardness is a chance for us, for the self. Please explain this concept better.
Grazie, sono sempre.
Thank you very much for these questions that are full of some sort of philosophical grace that is not often. St. Augustine really talks about this inwardness. But how many of us are sometimes overwhelmed by this nihilism that is extreme? How many among us every day are affected by that? Nietzsche said that every day when the day ends and you think about what you've done and maybe you think about the meaning of the thing you've done, well, I would like to ask many young people, but also many adults and grown-ups have this sort of regression and denial of the inwardness. Sometimes, well, according to my personal experiences, within this microcosmos you have no idea about, because it dates back to 40 years ago. Well, within the microcosmos of the lunatic asylum, you come across such a high level of suffering, of lives of people that feel the absence, the total absence of any meaning. So they feel this lack of meaning, the total sort of absence of meaning, and that leads to desperation and anxiety. So it's not about little meaning, but no meaning. And so how much responsibility in young people and how much responsibility in grown-ups is felt? Because, I mean, there is this tendency to deny the value of melancholy, sadness, and desperation, and pain and suffering, and fragility. And maybe we're going to talk about that later on. I don't know how much responsible are young people today and how much responsible are for that grown-ups. Maybe grown-ups are not able to look inside them, to listen to themselves, to listen to their own emotions, especially when they come across the others, when they encounter the others, because there is no self-awareness. But you can't have that if you do not constantly mirror your own consciousness into the consciousness that you try to have of the other. Within these limitless dialogue, usually are always the young people who reject any form of collaboration, or maybe even grown-ups that seem to be so much focused on success and other things. And Umberto Galimberti wrote extraordinary things about this topic. Well, sometimes some people said that the psychiatrists seem to be making an apology of suffering and pain. But apart from that, I think that even hope stems from desperation and despair. So I don't know how much despair generated by the other is around in the archipelago of young people. Maybe I've raised a hot topic, but I must say that I came across so many young people in secondary schools, and something that used to really surprise me is that they used to ask me questions to which I had never thought about. So in spite of everything, I must say, and I must confess, that those young people that sometimes made gestures, and what is communion and liberation about if nothing but rebirth and Christian triumph of, as Don Giuseppe said, of the celebration of the listening of what has not happened yet. Oh my gosh, maybe I've gone off the beaten track with respect to the question you asked me, Mr. Esposito. But I think that it's important to take up questions as challenges. So sometimes when you try to answer some questions, you risk to end up fighting with ghosts. Professor Borgna, well, I accept your challenge and I reply. In your latest book, Hope and Despair, published a few months ago by Einaudi, you quote beautiful words by Leopardi, and you say that even the sort of mixture between hope and despair is possible because even in the darkest night, there's always a certainty. But I come back to you again. When do you realize, when talking to your patients or to young people, you realize that you're going through a crisis or you are coming across a crisis? Despair and lack of meaning can shift into a new expectation, a new hope. How do you realize that this transformation is happening? Thank you for this question. You go back to fragility, madness, pain and suffering as key topics, and sadness, and the words that you seem to mention in a mysterious way. If we refuse mystery, we refuse the comprehension of the other, we refuse the perception of the horizon of the values of life. When a patient is overwhelmed by the lack of hope, it usually sinks into depression. You know that today people come across such conditions, and if because of the despair people get close to commit suicide, well, you have to face this. And remember this patient that one morning told me, I don't know what happened. The hopes I used to rely my life on, having a daughter in good health, everything was a failure. And I was so desperate. But this morning, suddenly, all of a sudden, I don't know how, and I don't know how it could happen, but I had no hope so far of a change in my family situation, but I felt transformed, I felt changed, and I felt hope again, and I felt the horizon of the future again. I felt imprisoned in the past and in a present that seemed to be like a cage. I didn't see any perspective, and suddenly this hope has arrived, and it didn't result certainly from the treatments. And where did that come from? I don't want to mix up metaphysical thoughts, religious thoughts, psychological thoughts, but where did that hope stem from? Because also from a human point of view, it was absolutely incredible and upsetting as an experience in men and women. Maybe, if we believe, there is a source, a hidden source, archaeologically source that is reborn only when we're able to perceive what happens inside ourselves and inside the others. In my opinion, there's no witness closer than the one of Leopardi about hope. So hope comes from despair. And Bernanos, I don't know if you read Bernanos, and in particular his text about these kind of topics. Bernanos says that you can't have this hope without before a failure, the consciousness of failure. And please read the book by Bernanos that is about this. So I now go back to Professor Galimberti. As Professor Borgna said, one of your largest contributions to our society was underscoring the connection between the nihilist condition and the technical domination of society. So what is the connection between these two elements, and how are we influenced by this connection? Well, yes, unfortunately, and I say it out loud, unfortunately, we are living in the age of techniques that it is not a tool in the hands of man. Hegel told us that when a phenomenon increases quantitatively, it's not just about its quantitative increase, but there is also a qualitative change in the surrounding landscape. If we had a very strong earthquake, maybe if we had a weak earthquake, we do not realize it. If the earthquake is strong, we realize it and perceive it, because we risk simply to have the building where we are in collapsing. So a quantitative change brings about also a qualitative change in the landscape. So everything that has to do with the technical things has become our new environment, our new landscape, the way we communicate, the way we think. And up until 30 years ago, there was no conditions like for us being constantly in front of a screen, regardless of us being studying or working. And so we have the highest form of rationality never reached by man, that is expressed by technique and technology. I do not mean computers, refrigerators, cars, mobile phones. I mean the kind of rationality that technology makes circulate. It means using the minimum level of tools to reach the maximum level of goals and achievements. This is also the condition of the market, but the market suffers from the human passion for money, and technology is exempted from that. So technology seems to be perfect, but just because technology has this kind of configuration, it's based on efficiency and productivity. They are its unique values. There is no salvation, there is no meaning, and technology and technique just work and have to work, and this functioning has become global, and we men are becoming the civil servants of technological systems. This is something I'm not the only one to say. First, Oswald Spengler, then Martin Heidegger, then Karl Jaspers and Luther Anders, Emanuele Severino said it before me. But nobody studies philosophy any longer because it's useless, so nobody knows about these ideas. But man has already gone out of history because man is not just a rationality and rationalism, but man is also rational because pain is rational, love is rational, imagination is rational. The ability to create ideas is irrational. Dreams are irrational. All these elements just are nuisances and somehow disruptions for technology. We are just tools and parts of the machinery, and we need to compare with the machinery, be part of the machinery, and work for the machinery. The machinery decides the amount and quality of our work.
This is a very simple example by Gunther Handlers, who wrote a beautiful book on man and the fact that the man is out of date, and he quotes a Hungarian journalist. In each interview, he asks, what were your feelings when you were doing these things? We're talking about the director, the manager of the concentration camp in Srebrenica. But in the end, he says, why do you keep asking me what were my feelings when I was doing what I was doing? My job was not to feel anything. So here we have the lack of inwardness, as Professor Borna was saying before. My job was to make the system work. By 11 o'clock in the morning, I had to kill 3,000 people, and then at 5 o'clock in the afternoon another 5,000 would arrive, and I was actually simply an officer, so to speak. So this is the model of the age of techniques. It is not much different, even though it doesn't have the dramatical tones of Nazism. When a bank clerk is invited by his directors to sell titles that are not good, and has to sell at least 1,000 titles a month, and if he doesn't do that because of his conscience, then he can just actually obey or leave. So this is the situation. Technology takes away the responsibility from us. And when you go to the post office, I go there because I cannot pay my bills online, and I see old ladies asking information to the clerks. Well, the answer is always, this is not part of my job. Franz Stangler answered the same way about the concentration camp. So the responsibility is just vertical, so it's that of the top management. The answer of Nazi generals when they were on trial was always, I just obeyed orders. So this is the same in this age of technology. So this is the terrible dimension of all this structure. Techniques is not technology. Technology follows rationality. The market follows this same rationality, but this rationality takes away the sense, the meaning of existence. You have to achieve the goals of the apparatus you belong to. That can be a lawyer office, a school, a hospital. If a doctor working in a hospital does not follow the rules, he runs some risks. Once I took part in a congress on the mitral valve, and he says that there was an example made about patients that were just like a graph where only the patients in the middle were actually receiving benefits from the protocol, but the others did not. If they die, what would happen then? So the doctor has even lost to have a clinical analysis of his or her patients. They look at the exams, but it doesn't even see the person, the patient. So, well, now I would like to ask you, in this system, which is based on control, is there something, anything, that can resist? Because I know that also in your articles, you always open a window on the dramatic situation you have just described that really takes our breath away, because there seems to be no salvation. And anytime it is possible, you actually suggest a way on how to go through this. So is there something that cannot be resisted? And I was actually impressed by the fact that you actually go back to the ethical principle of a limit, a limitation, and a salvation which is different from the Christian salvation, but it is rather another kind of control, so to speak. So please tell us, when you talk, especially when you talk to young people, when you talk about this containment of desire as an ethical principle based on limitations. Well, this dimension, this sense of limitation, is a typical Greek principle. In Greek, happiness is eudaimonia. That means the good result of your demons. That is to say, your characteristics, your vocation, your inclinations. If you manage to realize all this, you achieve happiness. But first, you need to know your demons. And so the Delphi oracle said you need to know yourself, and Plato said the same. So this is what Professor Borgna was saying. This is also a way to achieve happiness. You need to know yourself, and once you know yourself and you know your demons, you can actually realize your or achieve your purposes. So that was the first suggestion. But do not go over your limitations. So keep to inside the limits. So otherwise, you promote the wrath of the gods. You cannot go beyond certain limits. You can be a sculptor, but you cannot be as good as Phidias. If you want to be better than him, then your desire exceeds your limits, and you are out of any measure. You are no longer an artist. You are just someone who uses art to express the exaggeration of his self. So we have lost this sense of limitation because we are in an unlimited progress where we just wanted to increase our possibilities, our skills, and I think that our grandparents who had less tools at their disposal were probably happier than we are because they talked to each other. The collapse of communication due to social media is terrible because in order to communicate, I needed to have the body of the other person in front of me, of my interlocutor. So, well, and that again, just like love is also a cognitive skill. If I love someone, I understand him or her better. So this is something that has to be at the basis of our behavior nowadays. Well, now that there are no limits to sexuality, children start having sex at 13. So this becomes something different. We no longer cultivate love. So, but love is a way to create interactions and to find the meaning of, well, being human, because love, as we said, is not rational. It is part of our scenery of folly. Professor Borna says that folly is something that belongs to everyone, and Plato said that love is folly, it's madness, and with this irrational part of us, we can reach the truth of the other, and the other reaches our own truth.
Volevo chiedere un controcanto al professor.
I would like a reply on the part of Professor Borgna, because it is interesting what Umberto Galimberti said when he talked about the sense of completeness in the Greek world. Everything is finite. What is not possible to be limited is chaotic, is not complete in a way. So, well, this is a characteristic of our own desire. So I'm thinking about the beautiful title of a book by Juliana Carron that has a subtitle that is a little bit provocative, that is to say, what takes us away from the void. So, Professor Borgna, I would like to ask you, this possibility of desire that is not satisfied by the limit and looks for something more. Is this something that can help us to overcome nihilism? Well, words are living creatures. The words of philosophy and psychiatry can be complicated. If we change words, the world to which we make reference changes too. And I hope to answer your question, but we can be saved by this lack of significance, of meaning, if we give importance to the theme of inward life and the way we know it, our own and that of others. And we think we know our loneliness and the loneliness of so many young people. This loneliness can give rise to attitudes and behaviors that can be also very, well, destructive. And how can we overcome this? What is the hope that something can actually move even in the desert, as Dino Buzzati said, talking about the life of those that are prisoner of this lack of reality. So it's just a meeting, the desperate quest for that every one of us should do every day, looking for the sense and the meaning of the life of the people we meet. These things were said with much more revolutionary words by Father Giuseppe. I don't know whether you know him, you have known him, you've met him. But every meeting was a sort of grace that came also from the difficulty in understanding what was going on in the intimate life of the other, without taking into consideration their behavior or what they did or their past. So, from desperation without hope, from the loss of value in life, from being eaten up by the present that doesn't have any memory, any past, and any future, just as St. Augustine used to say, there is no hope. Hope is the memory of the future, and this can generate, and this is another idea by Father Giussani, depend from how families are formed, where we have some kind of richness in experience, the fact that you actually devote yourself to listening to others. Well, I've changed the words, but I would not want you to think that I have walked away from the path of your question. We can only hope to save just one soul. My great predecessor, the director of the psychiatric clinic Novara, used to tell me, if you can save just one young person from suicide, your life has got a meaning. So we shouldn't look at the quantity of results or we don't look at the hopes, but I believe that these set of feelings and emotions and desires can be overcome only with hope and maybe folly, utopia, that is to say, to create meetings, matches that have this level and dimension of possibility. That great philosophers in the past talked of. Mario Guartegni, who is a great Catholic philosopher, wrote that melancholy is just a desire for of infinity. So I would like to put this all in the same dimension as what we can have in our meeting, but also in the meeting we have today. But I believe that this extraordinary variation of themes and topics dealt with at this meeting in Rimini can give rise, maybe not in a deliberate way, not in a rational way, because rationality is the worst of follies, of madnesses, because madness is, well, in a way, even worse than folly. So with our hearts and by looking for our interior life, we just have these short images and, well, all these questions and this environment that I don't even know, because I cannot speak to people, I cannot see the people listening to me. And I conclude another characteristic of today's human condition that leads us towards an abyss is that of coldness, the fact that there is nothing personal. And even a beggar that calls me with a certain voice can give some sense to a lost day. Well, this is actually what Father Giussani wrote. I didn't read everything, And I'm sorry if I have to draw these conclusions which are a bit romantic in a way. But there is a great strength in the gaze, in the eyes of people that speak more than words. In particular, the eyes of Father Giussani. So while I apologize for these conclusions that are not very rational.
Siamo noi ad esserle grati.
We are grateful to you, Professor Barnya, so there's no need for you to apologize, not at all. We still have another 6-7 minutes before the end of our session, but before that, allow me to ask you a very last question. According to what you have said so far, because we are all suffering from nihilism somehow, can we get rid of it simply with, I don't know, words or rules? Well, rules, even strict rules, seem to be non-effective. If nihilism is about the loss of the meaning of life, then only life is the key to somehow heal from nihilism. So I have a last question that I start asking Professor Galimberti. Have you ever seen or come across anything that struck you during the pandemic or even beyond the pandemic of cases or situations where you thought, well, there's something new is happening, something irreducible, something that has to do with life in the meaning I was just mentioning? What would you suggest us to look at? I think that life goes on thanks to love, because a life that is not loved is a life that dies over time. And there are elderly that die not because they, are old or sick, but because they are not stroked by anybody. Eros used to go to Psyche as a nymph, and Psyche works only if she's enchanted by Eros, so by love. Therapies work if I really do take care, if I really commit myself with love. Heidegger used to make a difference between procuring something to somebody and taking care of somebody. Kafka used to say, writing a prescription is easy, talking to a patient is much, much, much more difficult. So it's all about love. Love is powerful. It's not just about solidarity, help, and charitable actions. But first of all, love is two relationships. It's singular, but it's plural. It just changes and become grouping, something collective. So love is either single or dual, and the Greek had this idea very clear in their minds. So the love condition is the condition sustaining and supporting life. When my wife died, I lost my life somehow, and I created a phrase for me. Sometimes I have the impression to be alone, sometimes I'm certain to be alone, but this certainty somehow kills you. Professor Borgna, well, if I'm not too much provocative, I would like to say that at the end of this life without meaning, we are all, even though some are responsible to a different extent. And I think that I've tried all through my life to somehow always remember what Father Giussani wrote, and his eyes spoke. Eyes can kill, eyes can talk, and words are weak compared to sort of biting eyes. And what is our own level of responsibility? I don't know. And we desperately try to understand, and you said it, we try to understand what can still give us some meaning, even if it's a weak, fragile, frail, intermittent, just rainbow-like, spot-like meaning of life. Thank you very much for your questions, Professor Esposito.
Guardate, mi colpisce molto, non so voi.
I don't know about you, but both our guests, with this last question, probably, told us something unexpected, because when I asked them to tell us something that could sort of make the miracle of life happen again, they just surprise us, because the answer is in you. That rebirth of life can happen nowhere else but inside ourselves. So this gives us the impression of such a high level of tenderness per se. Thank you very much, Professor Borgna, because listening to you quoting Father Giussani, you realize even more the ongoing contribution given by him to our own life, thanks to the meaning that you said, because everything is put at stake again. We are all involved. It's in me, it's in you. This can happen, this rebirth of life can happen inside ourselves. And allow me to say what I gained also with respect to this year's theme of the meeting about the wonder that let us access sublime and let us listen to the sublime. And somehow our two guests touched upon this topic. First of all, as Umberto Galimberti said, love is a great possibility of knowledge. It's a cognitive skill. It's not just a sentiment, an emotion, a feeling. It's the way to understand what is there. So the wonder in the title is not just some sort of, transient feeling. Not at all. It's a form of knowledge that is possible only through love. Let him be touched by love. And then maybe the most decisive word mentioned by Professor Borgna is the fact that infinity, if any, goes through an encounter. And it's not something that happens in our head. Well, that is indefinite, but infinity can happen only through an encounter and resonate deeply and truly. And I think that this evening we had the privilege to experience an encounter that resonated a bit of this infinity. Thank you.
Grazie.
days of hunger. Won't you buy